For centuries, people have grappled with questions about the afterlife and the nature of spiritual truth. These questions become even more complex when we consider interfaith experiences and near-death phenomena. Today, we bring you a story that addresses these profound mysteries head-on. A Jewish man's near-death experience not only provided him with answers, but also led him to embrace a completely new faith. His journey from Judaism to Christianity offers a unique perspective on the age-old questions of life, death, and spiritual truth. From his earliest memories, David Cohen's life was steeped in Jewish tradition. Born into a tight-knit Orthodox community in Brooklyn, he grew up surrounded by the rich tapestry of Jewish culture and faith. The rhythms of Shabbat, the solemnity of Yom Kippur, and the joy of Hanukkah formed the backbone of his childhood experiences. As David matured, his connection to Judaism only deepened. He threw himself into religious studies, spending countless hours poring over the Torah and Talmud. His dedication impressed his rabbis, who saw in him a future leader of their community. By his early 20s, David had become a respected figure in his synagogue, leading prayer services and teaching younger members about their shared heritage. But it wasn't just the rituals and texts that captivated David. He found profound meaning in the core tenets of his faith: the belief in one God, the importance of righteous living, and the eternal covenant between God and the Jewish people. These principles shaped every aspect of his life, from his career choices to his relationships. David's commitment to his faith extended far beyond the synagogue walls. He volunteered tirelessly for Jewish charities, organized community events, and even traveled to Israel to deepen his connection to the Holy Land. His dedication was such that friends and family often joked that he seemed to have been born with a prayer shawl around his shoulders. Yet, despite the unwavering certainty of his beliefs, a subtle undercurrent of questioning began to emerge in David's mind. It started as a faint whisper, easily dismissed amidst the familiar comfort of his daily prayers and rituals. But as the years passed, the whisper grew more insistent, urging him to look beyond the boundaries of his faith. David pushed these thoughts aside, redoubling his efforts to immerse himself in Jewish life. He took on more responsibilities at the synagogue, spent longer hours in study and prayer, and sought the counsel of respected rabbis. To all outward appearances, his faith remained as strong as ever. But fate had other plans for David Cohen. On what began as an ordinary autumn day, an event would unfold that would shatter the foundations of his carefully constructed world. As he left his home that morning, kissing the mezuzah on his doorpost as he always did, he had no inkling that his life was about to change forever. Little did David know that he was about to embark on a journey that would challenge everything he believed, everything he thought he knew about himself and his place in the world. The stage was set for a profound transformation that would redefine his understanding of faith, identity, and the very nature of existence itself. In the span of a single heartbeat, David Cohen's world would be turned upside down. The ordinary became extraordinary, and the impossible became reality. What force could be powerful enough to challenge a lifetime of deeply held convictions? The day began like any other for David. He woke before dawn, wrapped himself in his tallit, and began his morning prayers. The familiar words flowed from his lips, a comforting ritual that centered him for the day ahead. After a quick breakfast with his family, he kissed his wife goodbye and headed to work at his law firm in downtown Manhattan. As David navigated the bustling city streets, his mind was occupied with the upcoming Rosh Hashanah celebrations. He was scheduled to lead part of the service at his synagogue, and he mentally rehearsed the prayers he would recite. The crisp autumn air carried a sense of anticipation, the promise of new beginnings that always accompanied the high holy days. It happened in an instant. As David crossed the street, a car careened around the corner, its driver distracted by a ringing phone. The screech of tires on asphalt pierced the air, followed by the sickening thud of metal meeting flesh. David's body flew through the air, landing with a cruel finality on the unforgiving pavement. Time seemed to slow as chaos erupted around him. Bystanders rushed to his side, their voices a distant murmur as David struggled to remain conscious. He felt no pain, only a strange detachment as he watched the scene unfold as if from afar. Emergency sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder as help approached. Paramedics arrived, their movements swift and practiced as they assessed David's condition. Their faces were grim as they noted his dilated pupils, erratic pulse, and labored breathing. They knew the signs all too well. David was slipping into clinical death, a state where the heart stops beating and blood flow to the brain ceases. As the ambulance raced through the city, the paramedics fought to keep David alive. They administered CPR, desperately trying to restart his heart. With each passing moment, the window for successful resuscitation grew smaller. The human brain can only survive without oxygen for a few precious minutes before irreversible damage occurs. In the emergency room, doctors and nurses swarmed around David's lifeless body. The rhythmic beep of the heart monitor gave way to a single sustained tone. Time of death was called, a moment of finality that should have marked the end of David Cohen's story. But for David, it was only the beginning. As his physical form lay still on the hospital bed, his consciousness began to drift. He felt a strange sensation of weightlessness, as if he were floating above his own body. The sounds of the emergency room faded away, replaced by an otherworldly silence. David Cohen stood at the threshold between life and death, poised to embark on a journey that would challenge everything he thought he knew about existence, faith, and the nature of reality itself. What happens when a man who's never believed in an afterlife suddenly finds himself experiencing one? David's journey was about to take him into a realm that defied scientific explanation and religious doctrine alike. The veil between worlds had lifted, revealing a truth more profound than he could have imagined. As David's consciousness separated from his physical body, a wave of confusion washed over him. He found himself hovering near the ceiling of the emergency room, looking down at the frantic activity surrounding his lifeless form. The scene before him felt surreal, like watching a movie of his own death unfold. He tried to call out to the doctors, to tell them he was still there, but no sound escaped his non-existent lips. The initial disorientation gave way to a startling realization. Everything he had believed about death was being challenged. As a devout Jew, David had always imagined that after death, one simply ceased to exist until the coming of the Messiah. Yet here he was, fully aware and perceiving his surroundings with a clarity that surpassed his earthly senses. David's perception expanded beyond the confines of the hospital room. He felt an inexplicable pull, urging him towards something beyond his understanding. As he yielded to this force, the physical world began to fade away. The stark whites and grays of the emergency room dissolved into a tapestry of colors he had never seen before, vibrant and alive in ways that defied description. In this new state of being, David experienced a profound sense of peace and weightlessness. Time seemed to lose all meaning as he floated through this vibrant, ethereal realm. He felt connected to everything around him in a way that transcended physical touch. Thoughts and emotions flowed freely, unencumbered by the limitations of his earthly body. As David acclimated to this new reality, he became aware of a presence surrounding him. It was not a single entity, but rather a collective consciousness that emanated love and acceptance. This presence seemed to understand his confusion and gently guided him forward deeper into this unknown realm. The further David journeyed, the more he realized that he had entered a dimension beyond his wildest imagination. The laws of physics no longer applied, and the boundaries between thought and reality blurred. He could perceive multiple levels of existence simultaneously, each layer revealing new facets of a greater truth. In the distance, David saw a radiant light that seemed to call to him. It pulsed with an energy that was both inviting and slightly intimidating. As he approached, he felt a surge of anticipation. Something told him that this light held the answers to questions he hadn't even thought to ask. David stood at the threshold of this luminous gateway, poised to step into a reality that would forever change his understanding of life, death, and the nature of existence itself. The journey that had begun with confusion and disbelief was about to lead him into a vivid spiritual realm, one that would challenge everything he thought he knew about his faith and his place in the universe. As David stepped through the luminous gateway, he entered a realm beyond imagination. What he encountered there would shatter not just his understanding of the afterlife, but the very foundations of his faith. How could a lifelong Jewish man reconcile what he was about to experience with everything he'd been taught to believe? The environment that enveloped David defied earthly description. Radiant light pulsed around him, not blinding, but rather illuminating everything with extraordinary clarity. Colors he had never seen before danced in harmonious patterns, creating a landscape of ethereal beauty. The air itself seemed alive, vibrating with an energy that resonated deep within his soul. Overwhelmed by awe, David struggled to comprehend his surroundings. His logical mind grappled with the impossibility of what he was witnessing. As a devout Jew, he had always believed in Sheol, a shadowy underworld where the dead rested. But this luminous realm of indescribable wonder challenged everything he had ever known about the afterlife. As David ventured deeper into this mystical domain, he encountered beings of pure light. These entities exuded an unconditional love and acceptance that brought tears to his eyes. Among them, he recognized familiar faces. His grandmother who had passed years ago, a childhood friend, lost too soon. Their presence both comforted and confused him. How could this be reconciled with his Jewish beliefs about the dead awaiting resurrection? The encounters with these celestial beings left David with a profound sense of peace and understanding. They communicated without words, sharing wisdom that transcended language. He learned of the interconnectedness of all living things, the illusion of time, and the power of love as the fundamental force of the universe. As David absorbed these revelations, he felt a growing anticipation. The beings around him seemed to be preparing him for something momentous. The air crackled with an intensifying energy, and the light began to coalesce into a singular, brilliant point in the distance. An overwhelming presence approached, unlike anything David had ever experienced. It radiated pure love, wisdom, and power. In that moment, David knew he was about to come face to face with something or someone that would forever alter the course of his existence. With a mixture of excitement and trepidation, David prepared himself for an encounter that would challenge not just his personal beliefs, but his entire understanding of divinity and the nature of reality itself. The stage was set for a revelation that would bridge the gap between his Jewish upbringing and a truth far more expansive than he had ever imagined. What happens when a devout Jew comes face to face with a figure he never expected to meet? David's next moments would redefine his entire concept of divinity, pushing the boundaries of interfaith understanding to their limits. As the brilliant light coalesced, David found himself in the presence of something beyond comprehension. The energy surrounding him pulsed with an intensity that both awed and humbled him. His mind raced, trying to make sense of what he was experiencing. As a lifelong follower of Judaism, David expected to encounter the God of his ancestors, the formless, unknowable Yahweh. But what materialized before him defied all expectations. The figure that emerged from the light was unmistakably human in form, yet radiated a divine essence that transcended mortality. David's heart raced as recognition dawned. The compassionate eyes, the gentle smile, the outstretched hands bearing the marks of crucifixion. This was Jesus, the central figure of Christianity, a faith he had always viewed as separate from his own. Confusion and disbelief washed over David. How could this be? His Jewish upbringing had taught him to reject the idea of Jesus as the Messiah. Yet here he stood, face to face with a being whose love and acceptance were palpable, challenging everything David thought he knew about the nature of God. As Jesus began to speak, David felt a profound shift within his soul. The words bypassed his ears, resonating directly within his heart and mind. The message was one of universal love, forgiveness, and the interconnectedness of all faiths. David learned that the divisions between religions were human constructs, imperfect attempts to understand the infinite. Tears streamed down David's face as he grappled with this revelation. The Jesus before him wasn't asking David to abandon his Jewish identity, but rather to expand his understanding of spirituality beyond the confines of any single faith. This divine encounter bridged the gap between Judaism and Christianity, revealing a truth that encompassed and transcended both. In a moment of profound clarity, David realized that his lifelong devotion to Judaism had been a crucial part of his spiritual journey, leading him to this very moment. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for his religious upbringing, even as he opened himself to a broader perspective on divinity. As the encounter drew to a close, David experienced a spiritual awakening unlike anything he had ever imagined. The boundaries between faiths dissolved, replaced by a universal understanding of love and divine purpose. He knew that returning to his earthly life would bring challenges as he reconciled this experience with his Jewish identity and beliefs. David's journey through the heavenly realm had transformed him, opening his eyes to a spiritual truth that transcended religious boundaries. As he prepared to return to his physical body, he carried with him a message of unity and divine love that would forever change his life and the lives of those around him. As the divine presence enveloped David, a profound message of love and purpose began to unfold. The words, transcending language, resonated within his very soul. Jesus spoke of a universal truth that extended far beyond the confines of any single religion. He revealed that love, compassion, and forgiveness were the fundamental forces that bound all of creation together. David listened, awestruck, as Jesus explained that the divisions between faiths were human constructs, imperfect attempts to understand the infinite. The message emphasized that all paths of sincere spiritual seeking ultimately led to the same divine source. This revelation challenged everything David had believed about the exclusivity of his Jewish faith. As the teachings continued, David found himself grappling with an internal struggle. His mind, steeped in years of Jewish theology, resisted these new concepts. How could he reconcile this inclusive message with the belief in a chosen people? The idea that his lifelong devotion to Judaism was just one facet of a much larger spiritual truth both thrilled and unsettled him. Jesus gently guided David through his confusion, showing him how his Jewish upbringing had prepared him for this very moment. The ethical teachings, the emphasis on justice and compassion, the reverence for the divine. All of these aspects of Judaism aligned perfectly with the universal truths being revealed. David began to see his faith not as a rigid set of rules, but as a beautiful expression of humanity's search for meaning and connection with the divine. As David's resistance melted away, he experienced a gradual acceptance of this broader spiritual perspective. He realized that embracing these teachings didn't require him to abandon his Jewish identity. Instead, it invited him to expand his understanding, to see his faith as part of a grand tapestry of human spiritual experience. the encounter built towards a crucial moment of decision. Jesus presented David with a choice: to return to his old life unchanged, or to embrace this new spiritual path and become a bridge between faiths. The weight of this decision pressed upon David, filling him with both excitement and trepidation. In a moment of profound clarity, David made his choice. He embraced the message of universal love and acceptance, committing himself to a new spiritual journey that transcended religious boundaries. As he made this decision, David felt a surge of divine energy coursing through him, affirming his choice. As the encounter drew to a close, David prepared for his return journey. He knew that integrating this experience into his earthly life would be challenging, but he felt a sense of purpose that surpassed any doubts. With a heart full of love and a mind expanded by divine wisdom, David began his transition back to the physical realm, forever changed by his encounter with the divine. The line between life and death is often viewed as an impenetrable barrier. But what happens when someone stands at that threshold, caught between two worlds? David's journey back to his physical form would test the limits of both medical science and spiritual understanding. As the profound encounter with Jesus came to an end, David felt an overwhelming reluctance to leave the spiritual realm. The unconditional love, the sense of belonging, and the divine wisdom he had experienced were beyond anything he had known in his earthly life. The thought of returning to the limitations of his physical body filled him with a deep sense of loss. Yet, a gentle but insistent force began to pull David back. He understood that his time in this heavenly dimension was not meant to be permanent. A greater purpose awaited him in the world he had left behind. With this realization came a new challenge. How could he possibly convey the profound truths he had learned to a world that might not be ready to hear them? As David's consciousness began its descent back to the physical realm, he felt himself passing through layers of existence. The vibrant colors and ethereal light of the spiritual world slowly faded, replaced by the muted tones of the hospital room. He could sense the heaviness of his body, a stark contrast to the weightlessness he had experienced in the beyond. In the emergency room, the medical team had not given up. Despite declaring David clinically dead, they continued their resuscitation efforts, driven by a combination of professional duty and inexplicable hope. As David's spirit reconnected with his body, the monitors suddenly sprang to life. His heart began to beat, faint at first, then stronger with each passing moment. The doctors and nurses watched in amazement as David's vital signs stabilized. From a medical standpoint, his recovery defied explanation. The brain can typically only survive a few minutes without oxygen before suffering irreversible damage. Yet here was David, showing signs of life after being clinically dead for an extended period. As consciousness slowly returned to his physical form, David struggled to open his eyes. The harsh, fluorescent lights of the hospital room were a jarring contrast to the gentle radiance of the spiritual realm. He blinked, trying to focus on the faces hovering above him. The concerned expressions of the medical staff slowly came into view. David wanted to speak, to share the incredible journey he had just experienced, but his body was not yet ready to cooperate. As he lay there, overwhelmed by the sensations of his physical form, he realized that he had indeed returned as a changed man. The spiritual truths he had learned pulsed within him, as real and vital as his own heartbeat. As the initial shock of his revival subsided, David began to contemplate the challenges that lay ahead. How would he integrate his newfound beliefs into his life? How would he explain his transformation to his family, his community, and the world at large? These questions swirled in his mind as he prepared to face the immediate aftermath of his near-death experience, forever altered by his journey beyond the veil. Consciousness returned to David like a tidal wave, bringing with it a flood of new perceptions. The familiar hospital room now seemed alien, as if viewed through an entirely different lens. What startling revelations would emerge as he navigated this new reality with the eyes of one who had glimpsed the divine? David's senses slowly awakened, each one bringing a new dimension to his altered state of being. The sterile scent of disinfectant mingled with the metallic taste in his mouth, grounding him in the physical world. Yet his mind struggled to reconcile these sensations with the profound spiritual experience he had just undergone. The fluorescent lights above him seemed harsh and artificial compared to the radiant glow of the heavenly realm he had visited. As he attempted to move, David became acutely aware of the heaviness of his physical form. His body felt like a cumbersome shell, a stark contrast to the weightless freedom he had experienced during his journey. The pain from his injuries served as a sharp reminder of his mortality, yet it failed to diminish the sense of peace that permeated his being. The stark contrast between his old and new perspectives became increasingly apparent as David's mind cleared. Memories of his life before the accident now seemed distant and somewhat trivial. The religious convictions that had once defined his existence now felt incomplete, like pieces of a much larger puzzle. He found himself viewing his Jewish faith not as an absolute truth, but as one beautiful expression of a more universal divine love. David noticed immediate changes in his thoughts and feelings. A profound sense of interconnectedness washed over him, blurring the lines between self and other. The petty concerns and anxieties that had once preoccupied his mind now seemed insignificant in the face of the greater truths he had glimpsed. He felt a wellspring of compassion for everyone around him, from the nurses tending to his needs to the strangers passing by his room. As the medical staff hovered over him, checking his vital signs and asking questions, David yearned to share his experience. The words felt inadequate to convey the magnitude of what he had witnessed, yet he felt compelled to try. When he finally spoke, his voice trembled with emotion as he described his journey beyond death and his encounter with Jesus. The immediate changes upon returning to his body were evident to all who interacted with David. His eyes shone with a new light, reflecting an inner peace that seemed at odds with his physical condition. Despite the trauma he had endured, David exuded a calm acceptance and a quiet joy that left his doctors and nurses in awe. As news of David's miraculous recovery spread, he began to contemplate the challenges that lay ahead. How would he integrate his newfound beliefs into his life? How would he explain his transformation to his family and his Jewish community? These questions loomed large as David prepared to face a world that now seemed both familiar and utterly changed. As David grappled with his newfound beliefs, he stood at a crossroads of faith few have ever faced. How does one reconcile a lifetime of Jewish identity with a profound Christian experience? The answer would challenge everything he thought he knew about religion, identity, and the very nature of truth itself. In the quiet of his hospital room, David's mind raced with conflicting emotions and thoughts. The vivid memory of his encounter with Jesus stood in stark contrast to the familiar Jewish prayers and rituals that had defined his life for so long. He felt a deep sense of confusion and even guilt, as if he were betraying his heritage by embracing these new beliefs. As David began to recover physically, he threw himself into studying Christian teachings with the same fervor he had once applied to his Torah studies. He pored over the New Testament, seeking to understand the figure of Jesus from this new perspective. The more he read, the more he saw connections between his Jewish faith and the Christian message of love and redemption. Yet, explaining his transformation to others proved to be an immense challenge. When he first tried to share his experience with his wife, Sarah, he saw the shock and disbelief in her eyes. "David," she had whispered, "what you're saying, it goes against everything we believe, everything we've built our life on." Her words echoed the turmoil in his own heart. David's rabbi, a man he had looked up to for guidance throughout his life, listened to his account with a mixture of concern and skepticism. "David," the rabbi had said gently, "near-death experiences can be very powerful and confusing, but we must be careful not to let them lead us astray from the truth of our faith." These reactions only fueled David's internal struggle. He found himself questioning everything he had ever believed. Was he truly experiencing a divine revelation, or had his brain, deprived of oxygen, created an elaborate hallucination? The rational part of his mind wrestled with the profound sense of truth he had felt in Jesus' presence. As days turned into weeks, David's search for understanding intensified. He sought out interfaith discussions, spoke with Christian theologians, and engaged in long conversations with his Jewish friends and family. Each interaction brought new insights, but also new questions. Gradually, David began to see a path forward. He realized that his experience didn't negate his Jewish identity, rather, it expanded it. He came to understand that his encounter with Jesus was not about choosing one faith over another, but about embracing a more universal understanding of God's love. In a moment of clarity, David made a decision. He would not abandon his Jewish heritage, but he would incorporate his new Christian beliefs into a broader spiritual framework. He saw himself as a bridge between two great faiths, uniquely positioned to foster understanding and unity. As David prepared to leave the hospital and face his community, he knew that the journey ahead would be challenging, but he also felt a sense of purpose and peace that transcended the boundaries of any single religion. He was ready to share his story, knowing that it had the power to challenge, inspire, and perhaps even transform others as it had transformed him. David's return home from the hospital marked the beginning of a new chapter, one filled with both hope and uncertainty. As he shared his profound near-death experience with his loved ones, he quickly realized that his spiritual transformation would send ripples far beyond his own life. The initial reactions from his family and friends were a mix of concern, disbelief, and cautious curiosity. His wife, Sarah, listened with wide eyes as David recounted his encounter with Jesus and the heavenly realm. While she struggled to comprehend the magnitude of his experience, she couldn't deny the profound change she saw in her husband. David's parents, pillars of their Jewish community, received the news with stunned silence, their faces a canvas of conflicting emotions. As word of David's transformation spread, conflicts and misunderstandings began to arise. Long-time friends from the synagogue treated him with a mixture of pity and suspicion, whispering behind his back about possible brain damage or a crisis of faith. His rabbi, once a trusted mentor, now regarded David with a wary eye, concerned about the impact his story might have on the congregation. The ripples of change extended to David's professional life as well. Colleagues at his law firm, unsure how to approach his newfound beliefs, began to distance themselves. Clients, hearing rumors of his spiritual awakening, questioned his commitment to their cases. David found himself navigating a delicate balance between his transformed inner world and the external expectations that had defined his life for so long. Despite the challenges, moments of acceptance began to emerge. Sarah, after witnessing the profound peace that now radiated from her husband, started to open her heart to the possibility that something truly miraculous had occurred. David's younger sister, always the free spirit of the family, embraced his experience wholeheartedly, eager to discuss the implications of his journey. As weeks turned into months, The reactions of David's family and community crystallized. Some members of his synagogue, unable to reconcile his new beliefs with their shared Jewish heritage, quietly severed ties. Others, intrigued by his story, sought him out for private conversations, revealing their own spiritual doubts and questions. In a surprising turn of events, David found unexpected allies in a local interfaith group. Here, he connected with individuals from various religious backgrounds who welcomed his unique perspective. Through shared discussions and mutual respect, David began to see his role as a bridge between faiths, fostering understanding and unity. The transformation in David's life served as a catalyst for broader conversations about spirituality, near-death experiences, and the nature of religious truth. As he prepared to share his story with a wider audience, David realized that his journey had only just begun. The ripples of change from his profound experience were destined to spread far beyond his immediate circle, challenging and inspiring others to explore the depths of their own spiritual beliefs. What if the most compelling evidence for life after death came not from ancient texts, but from modern medical science? David's quest for validation would uncover a world where the line between faith and fact begins to blur. As David delved into research about near-death experiences, he found himself navigating a complex landscape of scientific studies and personal testimonies. He pored over medical journals, attended conferences, and engaged in lengthy discussions with both skeptics and believers. The more he learned, the more he realized that his experience was far from unique. One of the most intriguing aspects of NDEs that David discovered was the phenomenon of veridical perception. Numerous accounts existed of individuals accurately describing events or objects in the physical world while clinically dead. These reports challenged the notion that NDEs were merely hallucinations produced by a dying brain. Dr. Pim van Lommel's groundbreaking study on NDEs, published in The Lancet, particularly captured David's attention. The research demonstrated that people could have vivid experiences during periods of clinical death when their brains showed no activity. This finding aligned with David's own experience and provided a scientific foundation for what he had previously considered purely spiritual. However, David also encountered fierce opposition from skeptics who argued that NDEs were nothing more than the result of oxygen deprivation or the brain's last-ditch effort to make sense of its own demise. These conflicting interpretations created a tension in David's mind, pushing him to dig deeper for answers. As he continued his search, David had a chance encounter with a neuroscientist who had been studying the effects of meditation on brain activity. The scientist shared research suggesting that certain spiritual experiences could produce measurable changes in brain function. This revelation opened up new avenues of inquiry for David, blurring the lines between the physical and the spiritual in ways he had never imagined. The defining moment of validation came when David participated in a cutting-edge study using functional MRI to map brain activity during deep meditative states. As he recalled his near-death experience during the scan, the researchers observed patterns of neural activity that defied conventional explanations. The data suggested that David's brain was accessing states of consciousness that went beyond normal waking awareness. This compelling evidence, combining scientific rigor with his personal experience, convinced David of the reality of his journey. He realized that while science might not be able to fully explain or prove the existence of an afterlife, it could provide tantalizing glimpses into the mysteries of consciousness and human experience. As David reflected on his quest for understanding, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. His journey had not only validated his own experience, but also opened up new possibilities for bridging the gap between science and spirituality. With this newfound knowledge and conviction, David prepared to share his insights with others, knowing that his story had the potential to transform lives and challenge our understanding of reality itself. David's life had undergone a profound transformation since his near-death experience. As the sun rose on a crisp autumn morning, he began his day not with the familiar Jewish prayers, but with a quiet meditation on the teachings of Jesus. The change in his daily routine was just one of many that reflected his newfound spiritual perspective. Gone were the days of strict adherence to kosher dietary laws. Instead, David approached each meal with a sense of gratitude, seeing it as an opportunity to nourish both body and soul. His home, once adorned with traditional Jewish symbols, now featured a subtle blend of both Jewish and Christian iconography, a visual representation of his spiritual journey. Despite the peace he felt internally, David faced ongoing challenges to his new faith. Some members of his former synagogue viewed his transformation with suspicion, even hostility. Invitations to community events became scarce, and he often felt the sting of exclusion. Yet David approached these difficulties with a newfound patience and understanding, recognizing them as opportunities for growth and compassion. In his professional life as a lawyer, David found innovative ways to integrate his spiritual awakening into his work. He began offering pro bono services to interfaith organizations, using his unique perspective to bridge gaps between different religious communities. His colleagues noticed a change in his demeanor, a calmness in the face of adversity, a willingness to listen more deeply to clients and adversaries alike. As months passed, David experienced some of the long-term effects common to those who've had near-death experiences. He found himself more attuned to the emotions of others, often sensing their pain or joy before they expressed it. Material possessions lost their allure, replaced by a deep appreciation for life's simple pleasures. A child's laughter, the rustling of leaves in the wind, the warmth of human connection. One evening, as David volunteered at a local soup kitchen, he experienced a moment of profound realization. As he served meals to people from all walks of life, he saw in each face a reflection of the divine love he had encountered during his NDE. In that instant, he understood that his purpose was not just to believe in this love, but to actively embody it in the world. The impact of David's near-death experience permeated every aspect of his daily life. His relationships deepened, marked by a new level of empathy and understanding. He approached conflicts with a spirit of reconciliation rather than confrontation. Even his sleep patterns changed, with vivid dreams often providing insights and guidance. As David prepared for bed that night, he reflected on the journey that had brought him to this point. He realized that his story was not just about a personal transformation, but about the potential for spiritual growth and understanding that exists within each person. With this thought, he drifted off to sleep, ready to face another day of living his transformed life and sharing its profound message with the world. What happens when a former Jewish lawyer becomes an unlikely ambassador for interfaith understanding? David's unique position as both insider and outsider to two major religions was about to spark a conversation that would challenge centuries-old beliefs. As David reflected on his extraordinary spiritual journey, he felt a profound sense of responsibility. His near-death experience had gifted him with a perspective that transcended religious boundaries, and he knew he couldn't keep this insight to himself. With a mixture of excitement and trepidation, David began to share his story with others. His efforts to bridge different belief systems were met with a range of reactions. Some embraced his message of unity and universal love, while others viewed his ideas with skepticism or outright hostility. David found himself navigating a delicate balance, trying to honor his Jewish heritage while also embracing the Christian elements of his experience. In interfaith gatherings, David's unique perspective often sparked intense discussions. He described how he used his story to promote understanding and unity, emphasizing the common threads of love, compassion, and divine connection that ran through both Judaism and Christianity. His words resonated with many, opening hearts and minds to the possibility of a more inclusive spirituality. However, challenges persisted. Traditional religious leaders sometimes viewed David's message as a threat to established doctrines. He faced accusations of heresy from both sides, with some questioning his loyalty to Judaism, while others doubted the authenticity of his Christian experience. These moments tested David's resolve, but also strengthened his conviction in the importance of his mission. As David continued to share his story, he noticed a gradual shift in the conversations around faith and spirituality. People began to approach him privately, sharing their own doubts, questions, and experiences that didn't fit neatly into religious boxes. He realized that his journey was giving others permission to explore their own spiritual truths beyond the confines of tradition. The core message David believed his experience held began to crystallize. He saw himself as a living example of the possibility of spiritual growth and transformation, regardless of one's religious background. His story challenged the notion of exclusive truth claims, suggesting instead that divine love could manifest in myriad ways across different faith traditions. As David prepared to address a large interfaith conference, he felt the weight of his message. He believed that his experience held a profound purpose: to remind humanity of the underlying unity of all spiritual paths. In a world often divided by religious differences, David's story offered a glimpse of a more harmonious future where faith could be a bridge rather than a barrier between people. With this realization, David stepped onto the stage, ready to share his journey once more. He knew that his words had the power to challenge, inspire, and perhaps even transform those who heard them. As he began to speak, he felt a sense of divine purpose flowing through him, carrying his message of love and unity to all who were ready to listen. David Cohen's journey from devout Judaism to an embrace of Christian teachings stands as a testament to the transformative power of near-death experiences. His story challenges our conventional understanding of faith, suggesting that spiritual truth may transcend the boundaries of individual religions. The profound impact of his encounter with Jesus not only reshaped his personal beliefs, but also rippled outward, touching the lives of those around him and sparking conversations about the nature of divinity and the afterlife. This extraordinary account invites us to reconsider our perspectives on life, death, and the spiritual realm. It raises questions about the limits of human perception and the potential for experiences that defy scientific explanation. David's journey suggests that there may be more to our existence than what we can perceive with our physical senses, hinting at a reality beyond the veil of mortality. As we reflect on David's story, we are left to ponder: could such profound spiritual awakenings be more common than we realize? Are near-death experiences glimpses into a greater truth, or are they simply the product of a dying brain? The implications of David's journey extend far beyond his personal transformation, challenging us to examine our own beliefs about the nature of consciousness and the possibility of life after death. In a world often divided by religious differences, David's experience offers a bridge between faiths. It suggests that at the core of different spiritual traditions lies a common truth, one of divine love and universal connection. This realization has the potential to foster greater understanding and unity among people of diverse beliefs. As we consider the broader implications of David's story, we are confronted with a fundamental question: how might our lives change if we truly believed in the possibility of divine intervention and the existence of a spiritual realm beyond our physical reality? The answer to this question has the power to reshape not only our individual lives, but also our collective understanding of what it means to be human.